Welcome to the Confident Retirement Podcast. Is doing the most important things alone a good idea? How comfy are you with your choices when it comes to life's biggest decisions? What is real peace of mind with financial confidence, and how can you get it? Chris Fleming and Mark Peachy are the founders of LPF Advisors in Sarasota, Florida. On the show, they bring together the best and brightest minds to share with you how to have a more confident financial picture. They empower listeners with simple, common sense and financial wisdom. And now, here are your hosts from LPF Advisors.
Hey, I want to welcome everybody to the next episode of the Confident Retirement Podcast, brought to you by LPF Advisors. I'm your host here, as always, Chris Fleming. And today I have the pleasure of welcoming Matthew Eyet to the show. His firm was formed in 2019, and their focus is solving business issues for clients in the areas of civil litigation, tax controversy planning, business formation, and corporate law. They do this by providing unparalleled support to all small businesses, startups, and individuals looking to simplify their legal needs. Matthew, thanks for being here. Welcome to the show.
Chris, thank you for the warm welcome. That was very nice. Thank you.
You're welcome. Let's jump in. Let's have some fun. So I know you have a pretty interesting history. Can you just kind of go through with me briefly what brought you to where you are today, how you started your practice and got to the spot?
Yes. So I started out, I went to law school, and then I went to another year of law school because I liked the pain so much. It was tax law. I got a master's in tax law from NYU, which 24 credits of tax law is not the most fun thing, but I made it. And so then I started off at an accounting firm in the city, a regional accounting firm in New York City. And then after that, I broke off and I came out to Bedminster, New Jersey, and I formed a partnership with two other individuals. That was for 6 years. And so in 2019, I left that partnership and started my current firm.
Okay, gotcha. So if you could kind of go back in time and speak to the younger Matthew, is there some advice that you might give him, maybe something that you know now that you didn't know back then?
The one thing that always comes to mind is in law school, they don't teach you anything about business development or the importance of attracting and retaining clients. There's no guidance on that. So you're kind of just left to figure it out on your own, which I wish I would have been able to prepare better for that whole aspect of it.
Right. Yeah. Well, so you're learning this is how you practice law, but having a business that practices law, there wasn't really a lot of guidance on that.
Nothing,
okay.
Zero.
None at all. Okay. All right. So then how did you go about kind of picking the main focuses of your firm? So the service offerings, the ones that you focus on now, how did you go about picking those, or how did you come to those decisions?
The main decision that I made was to go and get the LL.M in tax. And through that process, I got to work with many clients that had tax problems, but they got to, they got to know who I was and trust me. And so they would call me and say, "Hey, Matt, do you do litigation matters?" And I've never done one, but I'm happy to do it. And you're the only attorney we trust. If you just split like half the time that it takes you to get up to speed with us, then we'll do it. And so I slowly branched out into pretty much everything that deals with money, other than MedNow and immigration law. Everything on the civil side, I pretty much do all that kind of work.
Okay. So yeah, that's interesting because a lot of attorneys, they'll say, well, I specialize, right? I have this one lane that I drive in or one lane that I stay in, but you've kind of expanded out to have other service offerings, and they might argue that, you're all over the place and you have to learn a bunch of stuff, but you're saying that's actually assisted you with the type of people that you work with?
Yes. So the idea kind of became after I got into several different matters. If you're familiar with the concierge doctor concept, where the doctor, the families that pay into this doctor, they're not on insurance, but they pay $1,000 a month or $3,000, whatever it is. But that doctor knows everyone in the family, knows all the situations. And so it's much easier for that person to either quarterback, sending out the specialists or simply just be up to speed at all times on what the issues are. Right. Mm-hmm. And so that's kind of the model I was going for, but I don't have to refer cases out most of the time. But every once in a while when I have to, I have really good, partners, or I shouldn't say partners, they're, people that I work with that I trust and I know will do a good job. So basically it's a one-stop shop. Whatever your legal issue is, you pick up the phone, you call me, and it gets taken care of.
And you can quarterback things if you don't know a certain area or need some help or assistance from another professional, you can always quarterback that. Okay. So are there some misconceptions that people have maybe initially when they start working with you, or just maybe misconceptions you find that people have with attorneys in general?
In my experience, I've found that my age has been, it's unsettling for some people. They typically go for someone who looks much older because they just assume, if you look older, you have more experience. Mm-hmm. And while that's probably true, that doesn't always mean they're more competent or whatever. You might not be the right attorney for the job, but that's been the number one thing that I've run up against.
Okay. And are there some areas of your business right now that you are finding especially satisfying? I don't mean areas of law, but just parts of your practice of running the business that you find really enjoyable. Yes.
And usually they are clients that are more or less, I've taken them on as pro bono. Right? I felt bad for them for some reason, but when we get a good result for someone like that, I mean, they're on the phone crying, or they come into the office and they make cookies for everyone, and it's just it's a really nice, uplifting moment for not just for me, but for everyone in the office, because you feel like you accomplished something on that day, and it's a good feeling.
Yeah, that is great. We're all in it for that. It's not necessarily to make a buck. I mean, that's nice, but to have those moments with people when you really made a difference in their life, it makes a huge impact on your motivation to keep going. Yes. Okay, so then along those lines, what would you say would be like an ideal client for your practice, if you could draw a picture of one?
So the ideal client would be a business owner who has multiple business interests or investments, and then has estate issues. And then, if you're making money, then tax is always... Mm-hmm. It doesn't matter what you do. If you're making money, tax is going to be part of the question. So that's just a given, right? So it's really somebody that's a business owner that would needs, overall advice on how to, structure things to avoid litigation, how to, deal with litigation, and then all the other transactional matters that are required.
Okay. And I think the misperception sometimes with business owners is that they may only need help in one area, where you probably find that they're all interconnected. Could you maybe speak to that a little bit?
Yes, and that's it. I'm glad you brought that up because of the various practice areas that I work in, there's almost a synergy that develops where, because I know this area of practice law very well, whereas somebody who specializes wouldn't even know that other area. Mm-hmm. They wouldn't be able to draw upon a concept or an argument from that field and apply it to their specialty, right? They just don't have that knowledge. So there's been times when we've won cases or won whatever we're trying to, achieve a good result for the client because we drew upon something from somewhere else, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Do you think there's common obstacles that you often help clients overcome, maybe business owner clients, things that either they don't see or that they get in their own way and you have to help them overcome or get over?
Yes, certainly that arises. I wouldn't say that there's any particular reason why it does. It really depends on the person. Mm-hmm. For example, some clients, they just don't want to pay any taxes, right? And so that's it. Like that doesn't work, right? You have to, if you're making money, you have to pay some tax. So that's a tough one to kind of argue them off of. But I've encountered that probably most often, but it's been a varying spread of different issues to help clients with.
Okay, so let's kind of switch gears and talk a little bit about business formation. So why is that choice and going through a process where you're picking the right business formation, why is that so important? Sometimes people just think, hey, I need to throw together an entity just so I can make up a name to do business as, and then I'm good. But maybe that isn't a good idea.
So there's a couple reasons why. Number one, it depends on what your goal is with starting the business, right? Mm-hmm. If you just want to hold a couple of real estate properties or not have a tremendous amount of activity, you want to keep your compliance costs as low as possible, right? Mm-hmm. And if you form a partnership or an entity that's taxed as a partnership, then you have to file a Form 1065 each year. And that's going to cost you anywhere between $500 and $1,500 from an accountant, even for the most basic Form 1065, because then you have to issue K-1s, et cetera, et cetera. So one of the big considerations I always go over to clients is you can do a single member LLC, which is then taxed on that person's personal tax return as a Schedule C business. And so that it obviates the need for this separate filing of this 1065, which is, it's somewhat of an involved task to fill out all the required fields. So that's number one. So compliance costs. Number two, where do you plan to go with this corporation or this business? So if you think that you might be a startup, that you could be going public, God willing, in 5 years, then it's always easiest to start as a C Corp, because you have to become a C Corp to go public. So some of my clients that have, really novel ideas, and they have, that home run potential, I recommend go start as a C Corp, because it's it's very challenging to convert from a C Corp to an LLC and vice versa. It's a pain because of the accounting method changes and all the other filings that need to be done. It's just much easier if you can plan out where you think you're going at that point in time, then it's easier to set your formation in accordance with that.
Yeah, well, and it goes without saying, and maybe you can speak to this, that having a formation of a business entity is also some level of protection against, things that might occur.
Yes, but there's a caveat to that, to the extent that you respect the corporate form. So, for example, if you own a single member LLC and you just run all the money through your bank account that you drive, so at that point, that you didn't maintain a separate existence of yourself and the entity. And so that the court could find that it's called piercing the corporate veil. That liability protection that you thought you got by forming the entity it's not there, because they can come after you personally.
Okay, and maybe you could speak to how you go to the next level after formation of the business and making sure that they're in compliance from a tax standpoint. Where does the estate planning side of it come into the equation?
That's usually, it depends on every client when they want to address that. Some clients are very diligent, and in their early 30s, they have everything, all their ducks in a row, right? Other clients, it's more, there's some imminent issue that they're afraid of, that they pass in the near future, and that's what motivates them. So that really varies across the spectrum.
Yeah, and I know in my experience, a lot of times when they experience a loss, maybe a parent or somebody that they know, then they get more motivated, because it's so fresh in their mind that occurred recently.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
And they're dealing with the processing of that person's estate as well. And they understand that, if we just did it this way, it would be so much easier. And so they want to make it easier on their kids or their heirs.
Yeah. And I'm sure that can tie into the succession plan with the business based on what entity type that they chose. Because a lot of times people who run those businesses, you can't really expect their surviving kids or spouse to just take it over.
I once heard a statistic, and I don't know if this, I'm just quoting this from a CLE I was at, but only 30% of family businesses survive the pass down to the next generation. 70% go belly up on that pass down for whatever reason, but it's a really risky proposition to rely on.
Yeah. That's really curious. You don't know if they don't have the same blood, sweat, and tears, or if they don't have the same motivation or drive to want to keep it going. Yes. But I mean, knowing that statistic, you would want to have some kind of a succession plan in place to try to prevent, because that could be the person's largest asset, maybe that business, and you'd want a succession plan, even if it was somebody who they weren't related to, if it could keep going. Yes,
I very often work with the first generation business owner, and one of their biggest concerns is always, what's going to happen when my kids take over this business? Like, how are the protections that the people that worked for me for all these years that I want to take care of? I want to make sure that I don't let them down. And so it's a common concern.
Okay, so let's change gears here and talk about on your website. And I was noticing that there's an area of practice in there called lottery law. Yes. So I have a guess on what that might be, but maybe you can elaborate on what that entails. So
actually, a fairly close friend of mine, he won $10 million on a scratched-off ticket. Okay. And so he called me. He was obviously ecstatic, but he wanted to avoid paying. He wanted to pay as little tax as possible. Yeah. So I dove into this area of the law and really got to understand how each state has their own gaming agency or whatever you want to call it, and then they have their own rules. Even though Powerball and the Mega Millions are multi-state prizes or multi-state
lotteries.
Yes, each state has its own rules, and so he got he won the lottery ticket in the worst possible jurisdiction you could win in the United States, because it's New York City, and so there's a federal tax, there's a state tax, and there's a city tax, a resident tax. So that's the worst possible place, but we were able to maneuver around and not have to pay the city tax because we have a good argument that he wasn't a resident, blah, blah, blah. So that was the key element, and that saved him about $475,000.
Wow.
So, yeah, so the engagement was worth it, but we really dove into this and figured all this out. Actually, I was the one that went and collected the check on behalf of. So I was like, I'm standing there with the giant smile, and I got a call from someone that said, "Hey, I saw you win the lottery."
Yeah, right.
It wasn't me.
Yeah, I was just there as a representative. So what about anonymity? Does that vary by state? Like whether you can remain anonymous or not?
So yes, it does actually. And for example, for New York, technically, they can request or they can require you to appear in person to accept the prize. But as a practical matter, they don't really do that. And so they allowed me to do it. As long as we had everything lined up, they were okay with me essentially appearing as an authorized representative of my client.
Okay. All right. Huh. That's interesting. Thanks for talking about that. So I'm wondering, what do you view as probably the biggest benefit that your clients experience by working with you in the areas of practice that you focus on?
I think it would be, with having the tax background is huge, because it doesn't matter what issue comes up. Tax almost always, it's going to creep in at some point.
Yeah,
even
it's pervasive.
It's like good things in life, taxes, right?
Right.
So taxes are always going to come and creep up. And so the fact that we don't ever have to go out and bring a specialist in to explain a tax situation, it just creates such an efficient, relationship. And my clients really appreciate that. It's like, oh, well, what are the tax consequences of this? And I can answer that right away, as opposed to, well, let me go down the hall and ask somebody, and then you're going to get billed another, $400 or whatever the case is. But like, boom, I can answer that right on the spot. Okay.
All right. So maybe without sharing any confidential information or any personal details, can you maybe think of like a recent example? It doesn't have to be lottery or anything, where you felt like you were especially helpful or really helped change kind of the trajectory of a client's life.
So I had a client, and this started at my old firm, who approached me. She was divorced. Her husband approached me under the marital settlement agreement that they had. He was responsible to pay the taxes for the years the 3 years before they got divorced. And it was a pretty substantial balance too. The guy just didn't pay it. Yeah. So he retained me to represent her. And we lost at the first level of the IRS, at the second level, and then the third level. And I said, no, it was like, let's keep going. We're taking this to tax court. We got to tax court, and they wiped the entire liability away based on the innocent spouse provisions. And so she was in my office like crying when we told her, it was a really touching moment, I have to say. Yeah. I didn't think I would be that touched by it, but I really was. It was just to see someone be like overwhelmed with joy because she was so terrible. She didn't sleep at night because of this tax item. Right? And even though under state law, she has signed a contract where her husband was responsible for it, but the IRS doesn't care about that. They give no credence whatsoever to that, so they can go after either spouse for that amount if it's a joint file return. So she was on the hook.
Yeah, and that's probably one of those few examples. I mean, there's lots of times where the IRS makes people cry, but this was tears of joy, right?
Tears of joy,
yeah, right. So it's the other side of the thing. Okay, so in your practice, your business, or maybe outside of your practice, is there something that you're especially passionate about personally, or is there a cause that your business has taken on or that you kind of champion or are in support of?
My main focus when I'm not working is my kids. So I love planning, what we're going to do and what happen, and talking to them and whatever it is that deals with them, because they're pretty active. And my son plays on the golf team, and so it's really, I love going to watch them.
Awesome. That's awesome. So I'm kind of thinking, we had spoken earlier about areas of your practice that you're really enjoying and that you like a lot. Is there maybe a challenge in your business or an obstacle that you have yet to overcome or that you maybe would like to improve or address in your practice?
I would love to have a more simplified tax code. Regulations, because that would make my life so much easier. But I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon.
No.
That would be the number one thing, an instantaneous answer there.
Yeah. I agree wholeheartedly. I mean, it seems like every year things change or something changes. I guess that's what helps to keep people like you and I in the importance for people is our knowledge on those things, because you almost need an LL.M or something just to stay on top of all of it.
I think the problem is that Congress has used the tax code as a way to influence economic behavior. Mm-hmm. And once you start to do that, you go down that road, then you have to make sure all the sections mesh together, or they create loopholes.
Right.
And so, the sections, they screw up somewhere, and there's a loophole that's created, and then it's going to be exploited because people pay a lot of money for tax advisors.
Yeah. And that's virtually impossible to get everything to mesh together. There's always going to be unintended consequences.
Yes.
Always. I guess that's good for us. So, and we're getting close to the end. If people wanted to learn more about you, or they wanted to learn more about your practice, or they wanted to get a hold of you, what's the best way for them to do that? Is that to go to your website?
Yeah, my website, which is www.eyetlaw.com.
Okay. And any information they would need on making appointments or areas of practice would be there, right?
Yes, areas of practice, and then the phone number, and they can just call and set it up.
Okay, awesome. Well, Matthew, listen, I want to thank you for taking the time to be here with me today. This has been very helpful, and I can honestly say I've never talked about lottery law on a podcast before, so that was a real pleasure. I also want to thank everybody for tuning in, watching, and listening to the Confident Retirement Podcast, brought to you by LPF Advisors, where we're hoping to raise the retirement confidence of everyday people, one show at a time. Thanks for tuning in, watching, and listening. We'll see you next time. Be well. Take care. Thanks, Matthew.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks for having me.
You've been listening to the Confident Retirement Podcast with Chris and Mark from LPF Advisors. For more information on them and retiring confidently, please visit lpfadvisors.com. If your ears are pleased and your mind is now at ease, do share the program with your friends and subscribe wherever podcasts are found.